we're getting there. Yes, I understand that I am streaming. Give it a minute. Some days are better than others. There. Oh, and hearing myself is back up. I don't enjoy hearing myself in a slight time delay. There we go. All right, so YouTube is working, Zoom is working. That means we can get to work. That's the way it goes. So I hope that everybody is doing very well on this bright and sunny morning here in Florida. I know it's a little chillier than some people like, but personally, I've always enjoyed the change of pace that winter can bring if we're lucky. And I also enjoy the change of pace that this Torah portion gives us, Mishpatim. You see, up until this point, from the first chapter of Bereshit, Genesis, all the way till now, to chapter 21, just beginning after Parashat Yitro, we have an almost uninterrupted narrative. Yes, there is some excursions into genealogy. There are some excursions into particular situations, such as outlining the format of the Seder of Pesach, but most of it is generally either narrative of the individuals that are at hand or the broader scope of the world. Beginning here in Parashat Mishpatim, we actually get down to what will dominate the rest of the Torah. Technically, everything up to this point has been preamble. Yes, I know it is beloved, and certainly I love it too. But if we have to ask why was the Torah given, we would be more likely to point to things like Parashat Mishpatim than we would be to Parashat Lech Lecha. Yes, the election of Abraham into his unique role as founder of the nation is very powerful, but ultimately it is not answering the main question that the Torah was given to us to answer. I think that made sense in English. I may have lost my syntax halfway through. That basic question is, how do we actually live? Yes, we can glean much from Abraham, and books have been written about his life and how it can give us moral instruction and ethical guidance. But ultimately, apart from the mitzvah of circumcision, there's not much of an actual to-do list in the stories of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and all the way through up to this point. We get a smattering of instructions, and the word Torah means instruction. That is the literal meaning of that word. So the purpose of the Torah is not just to give us interesting stories from which we can be inspired. This is not meant to be Aesop's fables. This is meant to be an instruction manual for life. As such, here, now in Mishpatim, we finally get down to the main business at hand. We've talked before about some of the traditional reasons of why we have the long preamble of Genesis and Exodus prior to this point, the basic idea of setting the stage, of helping us understand. And of course, there is much that we need to know theologically, philosophically, to fill in our connection to God. But really, this is where the rubber hits the road. This is where things start. And it's really a shame then that so many people check out around this portion of the Torah, that they get to the Ten Commandments and roll credits. CCB DeMille, he at least had the good graces of adding in the next narrative beat of the golden calf. But generally speaking, it kind of wraps up there. And then the next shot is looking at the promised land. Not so. The law, the instruction, the Torah really begins at this point. And yes, it is not as immediately accessible to those of us that are fond of narrative tales. And yes, it requires a great deal of reflection upon each and every phrase of the different legal principles. But that's the point. God gave us the Torah because living in this world is hard, and knowing what is right and what is wrong and sharing that with others in the community is not automatic. We are not mushrooms connect by mycelial network underground, all working in perfect concert and harmony. We have to sort these things out on a day-to-day basis. And as such, the Torah gives us a framework to do that will improve our lives and the lives in our community. So don't check out. Don't tune out. But stick around and let's take a look at some law. We're going to. Oh, sorry, my mouse actually scrolled down a little bit. We're actually going to look at a few range of ideas, and then we'll come back and we will delve into one topic in a little bit of detail, hopefully scratching the surface enough to whet your appetite to study more. All right, so we are going to pick up here in Exodus 22, verse 1, and we're just going to do a quick survey through part of this chapter to see some of the major legislation that's being discussed. If, in the act of digging through, the stealer was caught and is struck down so that he dies, there is to be on his account no blood guilt. All right, so obviously we are picking up mid text. As I've said many times, the chapter breaks were not Jewish. They were introduced by Christian scholars in the Middle Ages. So we are not beholden to them, but they are a convenience. So we're talking about theft here, and we got to pick somewhere to start for today. And the basic idea here is that if somebody is breaking into your house, which was digging through the wall in the ancient world, because the walls were made of stone with plaster covering, quite easy with a little elbow grease to get through. If somebody is digging through and you catch them in the act of doing that, meaning you find them, not catch them like apprehend, but catch them like discover, and you have to fight to stop them, then if they die, that is considered self-defense. However, there's a very important set of conditions on that. But if the sun rose upon him, blood guilt there is on his account. So if this person is breaking into the house during the day and you find him doing this and you attack him and you kill him, then you are now a manslaughterer. That you should not kill somebody for that. The underlying principle here, which we're not going to go into much detail, but just to share it, is that when somebody breaks into a house at night, they are under the assumption that the homeowners are there. If they know the homeowners are there, then that means the thief is already prepared before he begins even tunneling to do violence to the homeowners, because what homeowner is not going to be alarmed and upset that somebody is breaking into their house? Therefore, since he is prepared to meet the homeowners, he is prepared to do violence, and thus the homeowner is under no obligation to restrain him or herself in defending him or herself from that attack. However, during the day, most people were not at home. Most people were out and about and in the fields or in the marketplace or doing some other task. And that meant that somebody digging through was really counting on the building being empty. As such, we cannot presuppose violence as being part of their plan. And as such, we cannot use lethal force against them for coming into our property. It's a very interesting case and much more to be said, but not where we're going to stop for today. And then, yes, if he is caught, he is to pay. Yes, pay. If he has nothing, he is to be sold because of his stealing, meaning that if he cannot pay the amount that is due for his theft, then he is sold as an indentured servant, and the amount that is recovered from that sale is transferred to his victim. If what was stolen is found, yes, found in his hand, whether ox or donkey or lamb alive, twofold he is to pay. So there is a basic idea that for most things, you give back a double payment if it is still in their hands. Okay, like I said, theft is not going to be our main point, but do start paying a better attention from verse 4, because this is what we're going to talk about in more detail. When a man has a field or a vineyard grazed in, okay, and sends his grazing flock free, so that it grazes in another's field, the best part of his field, the best part of his vineyard, he is to pay. So this is a single sentence, and yet, as we're going to see, it's going to yield a huge amount of information about how we deal with this type of damages case. So make sure you understand the basic scenario. We've got Mr. Smith next to Mr. Jones, and Mr. Smith has his sheep, and Mr. Smith lets his sheep go and eat from Mr. Jones's field. Because you know what? Why not let them eat someone else's food? That's beneficial to my sheep, and it comes free to me. So in that case, what does Mr. Smith owe Mr. Jones for the damages? Well, at the moment, it seems that it says he owes the best part of his field or the best part of his vineyard that he is to pay, that there is a compensation required for the damages that have been committed. Now, we're going to take apart this verse in much more detail when we get to our commentary. So hold your thoughts and questions there until we get a chance to loop around. Let's continue with just a few more examples. Verse 5. When fire breaks out and reaches thorn hedges, and a sheaf stack, or the standing grain, or the entire field is consumed, he is to pay, yes, pay, he that caused the blaze to blaze up. So we already dealt with one type of damage. I'm sorry. I don't know why my phone has decided to annoy me right now. Let me put it on Do Not Disturb so that it doesn't disturb me. I lost my train of thought. Oh, yes. So if we talked about one type of damage where your animal goes and eats somebody else's product, now we are talking about a fire that you set that spreads and damages someone else's materials. And as you can see, again, there is culpability for the spreading of the fire, and thus a responsibility for that payment. Verse 6 and 7, when a man gives silver or goods to his fellow for safekeeping, and it is stolen from the man's house. If the stealer is caught, he is to pay twofold. That we've already discussed, but here we have the idea that if somebody has stolen it while you were looking after it, the thief is still punished as normal. However, if the stealer is not caught, the owner of the house is to come near God's oracle, that is to say, the house of God, what we know later, the place that God is, which would be the Mishkan at this time, and then later on the temple, to inquire if he did not stretch out his hand against his neighbor's property. So basically, he is under suspicion of whether or not he had taken something. And when he comes, he essentially will have to make an oath that he did not take what his friend had asked him to look after. Because after all, it was last seen in your possession, but you were just looking after it as a favor, and thus you have lower responsibility. Okay. We're going to pause there. There's so much more to go on in Mishpatim. I could just read the straight Torah for the whole hour, and we would have much to say. But I do want to show you the importance of digging a little deeper. So remember, we were talking about verse 4 here, which may feel like an uninteresting concept. I mean, after all, how many of us have sheep or cows that are grazing, and how often are they going to graze in someone else's field? Well, this is indeed a very common type of behavior, and one that is more than just about grazing. Most of us have pets and other types of animal companions, and as such, many of us can get into the situation even to this day. Indeed, there are many parts of the country and world that have taken rather strong steps to try and deal with issues, such as a dog befouling someone else's property. I believe I read just recently a story in Italy where they are requiring dog owners to have their DNA registered in order to be able to track any feces that are discovered back to the culprit. So this is still a very real topic in its most literal sense, but also this type of damage where you are benefiting from by offloading these externalities from someone else remains a very common and sore point in much of society of, am I allowed to benefit from someone else's property for myself without compensating them, especially when it damages that other person's property? And we also need to expand our understanding beyond just the situation of Mr. Smith and Mr. Jones, but what happens when Mr. Smith and Mr. Jones are not in their own fields, but are walking down the street with their animals or other analogous situations? So there is no better straightforward discussion of these types of issues than Rambam's Mishnah Torah, and that's where we're going to spend the remainder of our time. Yes, I am passionately in favor of Talmud study, but Talmud study is watching each and every element of this be pulled apart, wrestled with, analyzed, and then reassembled into a coherent legal form. And that means we don't get through as much in the same amount of time. Rambam, on the other hand, has done all of that analysis and systematized it in nice, clear, well, originally Hebrew, but now English, in a way that lets us cover more territory, learn more of the halakha, and hopefully inspire us to go back to the Talmud, Mishnah, the original Midrashim, to analyze it in our own time. So let's get into Rambam here. Damages to property. Let me just, hold on a second, organize my screen so that I can see the text and see all of you. So we are here in Damages to Property, Chapter 1, Paragraph 1. Whenever an animal owned by a person causes damages, the owner is required to pay for the damage was caused by his property. So as you can see, Rambam begins very systematically from first principles. And what does he recognize here? Well, he recognizes that the damage was caused by your property. That hadn't been explicitly stated in our text, and yet Rambam is showing through his analysis of the Talmudic discussion, which was the analysis of the Mishnah, Midrash, and Torah, that the reason for this is because it's your property. Note, as always, there are alternative ways of looking at this. You could say, well, you know, it was just a donkey, it was just a cow. I didn't make it eat the grass, so I shouldn't be held responsible. Not so, says the Torah. You are responsible, and as such, the Judaism can derive a general principle that a person is responsible for the damages caused by his or her property. Now, we're going to have to qualify that, and that's what much of the rest of the chapter is going to do for us, because, as they say, God is in the details. And yes, I know the original is always the devil's in the details, but really it is by drilling down into different cases and situations that we can see the wisdom of the Torah and its benefit to us in our own situations. Now, he's going to bring an example from further on in chapter 21 that we didn't get to in person, but I think you'll understand the general gist. When a person's ox will gore an ox belonging to a colleague. All right, so we talked about eating, we talked about fire. Now we're also mentioning about ramming something with horns. And that goring is another way that your property can damage someone else's property. So, as you can see from this verse, why Rambam is bringing it in particular is it exemplifies when a person's ox, that it is the property of that person that creates the ultimate liability. Now, these laws apply equally to an ox and to any other animal, beast, or fowl. The verse mentions an ox only because that is a common instance. People often ask me about this topic or mixing meat and milk and many others that mitzvot in the Torah that sound like they are very narrowly specific. Is this really only apply to the mother and her baby for the meat and milk, or does it really only apply to an ox? And as we see here, and in all those other cases, no. The Torah speaks of specific examples because those are usually the most common examples. And as such, the Torah can give a straight reference. The Torah likes to speak in concrete terms rather than abstract ideas. So now that we know that every animal falls under the auspices, regardless of whether it's listed explicitly in Torah, how do we actually work out the payments here? How much must he pay? If it caused damage through the performance of an act that it performs frequently and that is its natural habit, for example, an animal ate straw or fodder or caused damage with its feet while walking, he is obligated to pay the full amount of the damage up to his most choice property. Okay, so if the animal is doing what animals do, then you are on the hook for 100% of the damages. And not only are you on the hook for that, but you are on the hook for it, even including from your best property. That if that is the desire of the damaged party to recoup from that property, that is available. Essentially, your entire property is under a constant lien as insurance against the damages of your property that might be caused to someone else's, and as such, it can be seized to pay for those damages. Now, you'll note this is for damage done through the performance of a normal behavior. Now, why is that an important distinction? Well, let's take a look at the alternative. If it deviated from its ordinary habit and performed acts that it does not usually perform and caused damage in this manner, for example, an ox gored or bit, the owner is obligated to pay half damages caused from the animal that caused the damage, meaning from the animal itself that caused the damage, not from all the property in general. How do we know this? Well, from Exodus 21, and they shall sell the ox that is alive and divide the money. Okay, so what is the difference between damage caused in the normal behavior of an animal and damage caused in the abnormal behavior of an animal? Well, it is the predictability. If I am a shepherd and I am out with my sheep, I should be aware that sheep graze. That is what sheep do. So therefore, if I am walking them through someone else's field, I should be aware that they are going to eat from that man's field and cause damages, and thus I shouldn't have done it in the first place. It was easily foreseeable as being a type of damage that would come just by being there. That's what happens. If I take my herd of cows through the back property of your house and they trample your garden, well, of course they trampled your garden, because cows step on things. It's what they do. They walk over things, and they're definitely not going to avoid walking over a few carrots. So I am fully responsible for those damages because I could fully predict that those damages would occur. However, if I am walking my cow through your yard and it suddenly lashes out and attacks another cow, well, you know, that's not exactly the kind of things that cows do constantly. We're going to get back to an exception to that, but in general, they don't just lash out randomly. Domesticated animals are called domesticated for a reason, because they have a more predictable pattern of behavior that does not involve constant violence against other animals and people. As such, if it does commit an act of violence, that is abnormal, and as such, it was less likely to be predicted by the owner, and thus the responsibility is diminished because the owner could not anticipate that his animal would do something out of the ordinary. His obligation to pay is reduced. There is still an obligation, but it is reduced. And not only is it reduced to half of the damages caused, but there is a hard limit on how much can be paid back in the damages based on the price of the animal that caused the act itself, the offending animal. And let's get down into some numbers for that. What is implied when an ox that is worth a mane gores an ox that is worth 20 zuz and kills it, leaving a corpse that is worth 4 zuz? All right, let's make sure we get all the numbers here. So a mane is 100 zuzim. So think of that as being like $100. And a zuz then would be $1. So you've got a $100 ox that kills a $20 ox, and the dead ox, well, you can sell the body, you know, for a lot less than you could have sold it if it were still alive, but you can probably get $4 out of the body. Okay, so that means the owner of the ox that caused the damage, the attacking ox, is liable to pay 8 zuz. That is to say, half of the loss suffered by the owner of the ox that was killed. So let's just do the math here. We've got a $20 ox, but we can sell the body for $4, which means really we've lost only $16 when our ox got killed. Take that 16 and divide it in half because of what we saw from Exodus 21:35, and the owner of the attacking ox now owes you $8, 8 zuz, as a penalty. And the payment must be exacted from the body of the animal that caused the damage, as it is written, and they shall sell the ox that is alive, as we saw from 21:35. Okay, so that part's very, very straightforward. We take the ox that attacked, we sell it, and I have to give you 8 zuzim from the sale. Even though I sold it for 100, I only owe you 8 because that is the actual amount of loss, half of the actual amount of loss that you incurred. Everyone with me so far? I know it may feel like a little bit niggly here, but we have to understand that having these ideas, these principles, are one, intended to prevent people from being in situations where damages can be caused. If you know you are on the hook for your cows trampling the garden, you're not going to take them through the backyard of someone else's house. If you know you're on the hook for your sheep eating someone else's field, you're not going to take them through the backyard of someone else's house. And likewise, if more people recognize this principle as not just a legal idea, but as a divine commandment of how we must behave, because we will be held culpable not only by the court, but by God, then perhaps people would be a little bit more careful in their behavior. Likewise, in the alternative, the person whose ox was killed probably imagines that he deserves much more than just the 8 zuz that the Torah is giving him for the death of his animal. And the Torah is coming to say, just because you feel wronged to the value of 20 zuz doesn't mean you get 20 zuz in this situation. There are extenuating circumstances. The behavior was unpredictable, and as such, there is a limit to how much the owner is going to have to pay. And by having this be an established and especially shared religious principle, it means that the resentment might still be there, but it is not your neighbor saying that he doesn't owe it. It is the Torah saying that he doesn't owe it. And that can mollify the situation. Because remember, the Torah understood something that we in the modern world have forgotten. We have to live with each other. And as such, we need rules and principles that make living with each other work better. Because nothing will tear you apart than arguing about who owes what for damages. And that is something that the Torah tries to put to rest to the best of its ability through all of these principles, and which our tradition has spent a great deal of time focusing on. If you go into Jewish law and you just add up all of the pages that are spent talking about how to keep kosher and all the pages that are spent speaking about how to pay for damages, you will find that the sections of Jewish law that deal with damages far outweigh the sections of Jewish law dealing with kashrut. Kashrut is simple, right? We know what we can eat, we know what we can't eat, we know how to prepare it, we know how we shouldn't prepare it, we're done. Damages, on the other hand, there are so many different gradations and intricacies of cases that Jewish law has spent the last few thousand years trying to untangle them and explain them for the benefit of the community. Okay, so far we've got the simple case. $100 cow kills $20 cow. But we need to also deal with it because it's limited by the ox that actually did the damages on the other direction. So therefore, if an ox that was worth 20 zuz killed an ox that was worth 200 zuz, and its carcass was worth a mane, well, the owner of the dead ox cannot compel the owner of the living ox to give him 50 zuz. Instead, he should tell him, here is the ox that caused the damage. Take it and depart. This applies even if the ox that gored is worth only a dinar. Similar principles apply in all analogous situations. All right, so what's the problem here? Well, the problem is, from the point of view of the person with the dead ox, is the ox that killed my ox is worth a tiny amount. This was my prize-winning ox. This was the sire of great champion oxes, or whatever it is that makes an ox more valuable. And I have to admit, I don't know that personally. This ox was the king of oxes. It's worth $200. And your shabby little ox, worth only $20, killed it. Okay, yeah, maybe I can sell the carcass of my prize-winning ox. Maybe it's got beautiful leather or something for $100, 100 zuzim, a mane. But that means I'm still out 100 zuz for the damage. Okay, the Torah says we need to split that. Therefore, you owe me 50 zuzim to make up for the difference between the carcass and the total value of the animal. but your ox is only worth 20. Well, I, the owner of the prize ox, I'm going to want to demand that you chip in an extra 30 zuzim to meet that 50 minimum that was supposed to be the value owed to me after the carcass had been sold. However, Exodus 21:35 says that it's the living ox that is sold to provide the money, and my living ox is not going to provide 50 zuzim to compensate you. What's the solution? Well, we know what the owner of the king ox would want, which is give me more, but the Torah set a limit. And the Torah said, look, this was unpredictable behavior. It was not negligence on the part of the owner of the shabby ox. And therefore, yes, he owes you, but only as much as the Torah said, and that is to the limit of the value of the ox itself. And this ox is only worth 20 zuz, so take the ox, sell it, do with it what you want. It's yours now. But he doesn't owe you anything beyond that. There is a hard limit in this case because it is different than gross negligence that we talked about with the trampling of a garden, for example. And since it is not gross negligence, there is this limit that the Torah puts in place. And that principle of understanding that, yes, someone else's property caused damage to mine, but they didn't do it in a way that was intentional or was easily foreseen. It wasn't that they were negligent or foolish. It's one of those things that happened. And as such, I need to be prepared to A, take only half of the value from them, and B, recognize that that value is only going to come up to the amount of the actual offending property. And that is part of reconciling two people who have gone through what would probably be a very upsetting incident with one ox killing another or one property damaging another, recognizing that sometimes these things happen in ways that are not going to create 100% liability and responsibility, but also will not create zero liability and responsibility. And recognizing that blend is an important part towards healing the community and the relationship, and recognizing that if the person pays with the full ox, they have done what Torah asked. And we can't ask for more than that. And likewise, recognizing that your neighbor deserves that full value of the ox and giving it to them, well, you are doing what Torah has asked of you, not what your neighbor has demanded, but what Torah has asked. And as such, you can feel confident that you have done what is right, and they can still be disappointed, but at least confident that you have done what is right for them. That is the principle that underlies all of this sort of tort law that we are going through. All right, let me take a quick break because I've been speaking kind of nonstop for half an hour. Double check our YouTube chat. Make sure there's no one dropping a lot of questions there. Okay, we're good. Now, we are going to continue now with with more variations on the theme. An animal that performs a deed it is accustomed to performing by nature is called mu'ad. Important technical term in Jewish legal principles. It means that it is forewarned. It is aware of the issue, and meaning the owner is aware of the issue. Now, obviously, the things that we talked about before, like stepping in the garden, we would say that it is mu'ad. It is forewarned, and the owner is forewarned about that type of behavior because it is normal. But when an animal deviates from its ordinary pattern and performs an act that its species does not usually perform, like an ox goring or biting, it is called tam, meaning that it is innocent. It is presupposed not to be prone to doing these things. However, if the animal continues to follow the deviant pattern on several occasions, it is considered to be mu'ad with regard to the deviation to which it has become habituated, as implied by Exodus 21:36, or it is known that it is a goring ox. Okay, so up to this point, we have been dealing with generic cows, but now we need to deal with the individual. That, yes, the average ox does not go around goring or biting. However, this ox Oxy the Vicious, he he's got a reputation. He has done this multiple times, and we now can establish that this is an ox that gores. As such, it becomes mu'ad. It is considered now to be in the category of its ordinary behavior. As such, that is going to create more liability for the owner. Because now, if we know that this is Oxy the Vicious, then we can demand that the owner of such an ox will pay the full penalty rather than only the half penalty. Everybody got that idea here? All right, so yes, in general, we have animals as sort of like, well, it's domesticated, yada, yada, but in particular, an animal can move itself out of that status by repeating its behavior. So 5 types of activities are considered to be abnormal for an animal. If it repeatedly performs any of them, it is considered to be mu'ad with regard to that animal. Okay, so we're going to list 5 things that are not normal, but could become normal depending upon the individual animal. So what are the 5? An animal is not considered to be prone to gore, to butt, to bite, to lie down on large utensils, or to kick. Again, this is a generic animal. Obviously, there are certain species that have different tendencies, and obviously there are individuals that will have these tendencies, as that's kind of the point. So in general, your average, let's just stick with cow or sheep, is not likely to gore, to butt, to bite, to lie down on large utensils, right? It's not going to come over to your plow and just plop down on it, because most animals don't like to sit down on big, bulky things, and kick. However, if it becomes accustomed to such an activity, its owner should be forewarned, meaning that he should know that this is the kind of thing this animal does routinely, and as such, I need to be more on alert for it, and thus I will be more responsible for it, and thus I will be more liable for it if it actually does these things. So you can see this, that chain of knowledge should lead to responsibility, and responsibility creates liability if it is violated. And that is trying to change our pattern of behavior. Because remember, Jewish law, well, like American law in theory at least, is not just about who is penalized and who benefits. It is supposed to be about how do we adjust patterns of behavior and how do we adjust patterns of attitude. And here you can see that in sort of stark relief, that as you recognize the growing problem with a particular animal, your treatment of that animal, your precautionary measures for that animal should correspondingly increase. And if they don't, there will be more severe penalties. But really, the ultimate goal here is not that we get the right settlement in a case like this, but that damages don't happen at all. That's the ultimate goal. Now, the other side, because again, alternatives are always useful for figuring these things out and what the intention is. The other side might say, well, then why not just have all animals constantly be considered mu'ad and warned, and that way everyone will be completely cautious with every animal against any possible damages? Well, because you can't actually live with animals like that. You can't live with any property like that. If we say that every property owner is infinitely liable for any damage their property does, no matter how bizarre and unpredictable it is, no matter how careful they are being, because, hey, you could have known that this was going to spontaneously explode, well, then how do we actually live in such a network of responsibility? There are going to be things that happen that are just sort of like, well, yeah, I was taking the necessary precautions and it still went weird. I don't think I should be 100% responsible in that situation. And the Torah agrees. Okay, let's continue, because otherwise we'll run out of time. So, at the outset, an animal is, however, considered prone to eat foods that are appropriate for it. So these are the things that you should already know, that the animal is likely to do these things, right? What is an animal likely to do? It's likely to eat foods that are appropriate for it, to break utensils on which it treads as it walks, right? Animals step on things all the time. And similarly, an animal is considered prone to lie down on small utensils and crush them. Yeah, cow is not going to sit down on a plow, but leave a little trowel lying around, and cow is not even going to notice it when it just goes flump and breaks the handle. So these are things that you, the owner, need to be looking out for from the start, because animals just do these things, and it's your responsibility to keep them from causing damage to someone else's property in their normal patterns of behavior. Okay. Questions, comments? Haven't seen any for a bit, so let's just go back. Okay, we're looking good. 5 species, however, there are types of animals that are different than others, are considered prone to cause damage from the beginning of their existence, meaning that you don't need to wait until they've done it 3 or 4 times. This applies even if they have been domesticated. Probably a bit of a mistranslation, as we'll see. The word tamed might be better here. Therefore, if they cause damage or death by goring, biting, treading, lying down upon, or the like, the owner is liable for the entire amount of the damages. They are a wolf, a lion, a bear, a tiger, and a leopard. Similarly, a snake that bites is considered to be muad, even if it has been domesticated or tamed. So if you want to have a pet tiger, which there weren't exactly rules about that in most ancient law systems, although the rabbis do warn against keeping dangerous animals as pets. But if you had a pet tiger and it goes and bites somebody unexpectedly, the court is going to tell you that's not unexpected. It's a tiger, and tigers bite. And I don't care if it's been the sweetest tiger since you had it as a baby, it's a tiger. And as such, we cannot give it the benefit of the doubt until it behaves in a dangerous way. We have to assume that it is dangerous from day one. And as such, the owner should be taking all proper precautions, because the owner will be 100% liable for the damages because of the nature of the animal. So there are certain things that are considered to be prima facie dangerous from the beginning, and as such, you do incur that 100% liability. Sheep, cows, not so much. Tigers, bears, yeah, you know what you're dealing with here, and you know how unpredictable they can be. Whenever an animal is mu'at, meaning whenever an animal is of the type where we believe it is a known danger in this way, then the owner must pay the entire amount of the damage, even with his most choice property. So if you have a cow that is constantly biting people and it bites the ear off somebody's favorite donkey, you have to pay for the entire damages to that donkey, which would not be the life of the donkey, assuming it didn't die. If it kills the donkey, however, you will be on the hook for the entire cost of the donkey, regardless of whether your cow is worth a lot less than that donkey. No, this is a known dangerous cow. As such, you are have increased responsibility and increased liability. Whenever, by contrast, an animal is considered a tam, meaning it is behaving in normal ways and is not considered to be a routine offender, the owner is required to pay only half the amount of damages. Moreover, that half is taken only from the animal itself, as we have talked about. When does the above apply? When the animal entered into the domain belonging to the person to whom the damage was caused and caused damage. When it goes from Mr. Smith's yard into Mr. Jones's yard, then everything we've been talking about applies as expected. However, when, however, the person to whom the damage was caused entered into the domain of the person whose animal caused the damage, the owner is not liable for anything. If Mr. Jones decides to wander into Mr. Smith's yard with his award-winning ox, and Mr. Smith's ox gores the ox, the king ox, you know what? What were you doing on my property? For he, meaning the owner of the damaging animal, can tell the party who suffered the damages, if you had not entered my domain, you would not have suffered any damages. Indeed, this is explicitly stated in the Torah, Exodus 22:4, and if he shall send forth his animals, and they pasture in another's field. The sending forth is important. If the animal is just sitting at home and someone else comes into the domain and is injured by it, then it is the person who came in that is responsible. Now, there are additional caveats for when a person is invited in and the damages are caused by the known offending animal. But for the moment, that's this is the simple case that we're dealing with. Okay, and now we're just going to begin. Can I get it all? No, not quite. We're just going to begin the final topic for today, which is moving us beyond the vanilla case, just to show you that it can get much more complicated than Mr. Smith's field and Mr. Jones's field, in order to show us what would probably be the more common issue, which is what's called the public domain. So the public domain in Jewish law is talking about the areas in the community that are not private property. So the road outside your house is the public domain. Your house is not. The fields that are nearby might be public domain, but if they're owned by someone, then they are not. So this Reshut HaRabim, this public area, has a different set of rules. The following rules apply when a person's animal causes damage in the public domain or in a courtyard that belongs neither to the owner of the animal that caused the damage nor to the party who suffered the damages, or in a courtyard owned jointly by both parties that is set aside to leave produce there and or to harbor an animal, like a valley, for example. Okay, let me just tell you a little bit about courtyards in the classic world. Courtyard would be a shared space. In the classic world, you would have a main road, and then off the road there would be little alleys that would open up into a courtyard, and around the courtyard would be the different houses, kind of like a cul-de-sac in the modern world, except the people who were in the houses sort of owned jointly that courtyard as a shared space. As such, it doesn't belong to one or the other, or it is a shared ownership. And then, of course, we had the other case here where you took your animal into someone else's courtyard and someone else took their animal into that courtyard. So it was happening entirely on neutral property, but not public domain property. So these are the different situations that we need to consider. Now, as you can already begin to imagine, this is going to add elements of complexity to this, and that is good, because life is complex and you can't solve problems by just constantly referring to a simple platitude of, well, it's your cow, you have to pay for it. That is not nearly nuanced enough to cover all of the situations that can arise and the actual responsibility that should be incurred by the different parties. We need nuance because life is complicated. And any sort of legal system or ethical system that pretends it isn't is missing the mark. It's not just about encouraging you to be a good person. It is about actually encouraging you to do the right thing. And that does presuppose that there are some actions which are more right than others. That doesn't mean that, and also it's very important that the Torah, you'll notice, is not saying if your cow did the damage, you need to throw yourself on the ground at the mercy of the victim and say, oh, please forgive me for my cow's horrible behavior. You know, sometimes you're off the hook. Sometimes doing the right thing is not paying the damages because it wasn't your fault. We confess to our guilt when we are guilty, not just when someone else has made us feel guilty. And the halakha, the law, can help avoid that feeling of constant guilt that some of us might tend towards. Okay, so let's get back to our case. If the animal caused damage by eating or treading in its ordinary manner, remember this is our normal stuff, the owner is not liable. For the animal has permission to go from here to there, and it's the habit of an animal to go and eat as it proceeds, and to break anything lying in its way as it proceeds. So, if you are sitting on the side of the road, and you've got your Fabergé egg collection all laid out in front of you there on the sidewalk, because, you know, you just enjoy admiring them in the bright sunlight of the open road, and I'm coming through with my herd of sheep and they kick your Fabergé eggs to pieces, you can't complain because my animals have the right to be in this road just as much as you do. That's what animals need to do from time to time. We can't lock them away in private freeways that are only accessible to the animals. As such, you should know better than to put out your Fabergé egg collection in the middle of the public thoroughfare, because the people who are coming through there, the animals that they run, will not know to be careful about your little trinkets. They're just going to stumble forward in the manner of animals. Again, note the way that the responsibility is being shifted back and forth based upon what is the normal behavior and what should thus be the normal assumptions. Now, let's just roll this down to get it in better position. Different rules apply if it caused damage by goring, butting, kicking, or biting. Remember, those are the other types of behaviors. If its status is tam, the owner must pay for half the damages. If its status is mu'ad, the owner must pay the entire amount of the damages. So if it is a known damager, then absolutely you're paying 100% of the damages because of its behavior in this place. If it is not a known damager, but it is damaging in ways that are exceptional, then we actually do have responsibility in this shared domain for the animal's behavior. And it goes back to what we talked about before, that half damage mark. So this is a little bit different. Notice the shift. In our very first text, it said that if an animal eats from someone else's property, that you have to pay all of the damages, and that if the animal behaves bizarrely, causing damages, then you only pay half, unless it is a warned animal, mu'ad, in which case you pay all. Here, those last two conditions stay the same, but the first, an animal eating as it goes, has changed to be zero responsibility because we are not on your property anymore. Now we are in the general shared property. And as such, I have the right for my animal to proceed to walk in the shared area and to do so in a way that is normal for the animal. It is not my responsibility to muzzle it. It is not my responsibility to put it on a wagon so that it doesn't step on things or anything else. I'm allowed to let my animal walk here, and you should be aware that that is a very real risk if you are in that space as well. Again, a shared understanding of a shared space is going to create more peace, as well as hopefully avoid people putting out their Fabergé egg collections and then getting upset. So notice that in this part in particular, we're highlighting this this shared nature of a space, something that gets too lost, I believe, in our modern society, where each of us feels the king of our own little world that extends immediately around us. And as we walk, we expect the rest of the world to conform to our needs and wishes. Not so, says Judaism. Just because you're in a place doesn't mean you are the king of the place. In fact, if you're off your own property, you have very little right to demand other people change their behavior, provided they're not doing something exceptionally odd. If they're just running their sheep through the street, deal with it. That's their right to do so. And you're going to be on notice that if something gets broken of yours, you shouldn't have had it in the street for the sheep. All right, one last little version of this. When a courtyard owned jointly by both parties is designated for produce and not for harboring an animal, so we've got a little courtyard or all the houses around it, but everybody agrees that that's just the courtyard for our produce. It's not our courtyard for animals. And one of the parties lets his animal in and it causes damage, the owner is liable even for damage caused by eating or treading. Even though it is kind of shared property and he kind of has the right to be there, he does not have the right to have his animals there because that's not part of the agreement, kind of the HOA in the ancient world. Similarly, if both of them had the right to harbor an animal there, everybody says, yeah, fine, leave the animals in the courtyard. but only one had the right to keep produce there, different stipulation in their ownership agreement. If an animal belonging to the other damaged that person's produce, the owner is liable even for damage caused by eating or treading. So again, life is complicated as such. The rules for it need to be equally complicated. It's not enough to simply say, be nice, take care of the things you're responsible for. It has to be spelled out in what some feel excruciating detail, what I consider to be enlightening detail, because it reminds us again and again of both how high we must go in our responsibility to each other, and also where we do not need to feel responsible for each other. That sometimes the damage that happened to your stuff is your fault, even if my property had a part to play in it. And as such, it is both liberating as well as obligating. But that is what life is. We have great freedoms in life and great liberty to do so much under Torah, but we can never forget that we also have responsibilities and limits that are in relationship with those around us. This is just a small taste. It's not even the end of the first chapter of Rambam for this particular topic. And as always, go out, study, learn. I'm always open for additional questions, but not just looking at the details of what we do and don't do, which I will remind you that even if American law says we don't have a responsibility, Jewish law will often tell us we do, and that we are obligated to abide by both. So this is our obligation to learn, even if there isn't a court that will be enforcing it. But it should be enforced by all of us as a way of stretching out to extend this notion of community and of shared understanding of how we behave within that shared life. That's all for today. Everybody, I hope will have a great day and take care and keep studying. There is always much more to learn. Be well.